Live your life within the moment. And don't go wait until the morning. You never know when it is over. All that I know is we'll get older. So let us dance this night away.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to today's episode of Voices in Action, a podcast by Eastern Oregon Center for Independent Living. And as always, before we begin today's episode, I'd like to encourage you all to please listen to the following important public service announcement from the late and Honorable Judy Heumann. Judy is the former United States Assistant Secretary of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services in the Clinton administration and the former U.S. State Department Special Advisor for International Disability Rights in the Obama administration. Recently, Judy starred in the Netflix documentary Crip Camp.
Hello, my name is Judy Heumann. I'm here today to encourage you to please take your COVID vaccine. And if you have friends and family that haven't, please encourage them also. COVID is to be taken seriously. In addition to taking the vaccine, please use other protective methods. Wear a mask, use gloves, and sanitize frequently. If you need additional information and you live in Eastern Oregon, you can contact EOCIL. Thank you, and protect yourselves and the community.
Welcome, everyone, to Voices in Action, a podcast by Eastern Oregon Center for Independent Living. And I'm your host, Amador Perez. Over the course of seasons 2 and 3, like you heard me say in the past, we're going to be covering a variety of topics that relate to EOCIL's core priorities, which are the following but aren't limited to disability actionable research, HIV prevention, harm reduction services, HIV community services, and various others. And if you'd like to know a full list of programs and services that we offer, I do encourage everyone to check us out online at www.eocil.org, or you can follow us and check us out on any of our social media platforms, whether it be Facebook and Instagram, and interact with us through there. Today, we're going to be speaking with an individual with lived experience, a leader of global or local advocacy organizations, and a person responsible for developing and implementing policies that can affect our daily lives. And we're going to hopefully learn from each other along the way. And I hope you guys have a wonderful time listening to this episode. So today I'm going to be speaking with Bryce regarding their lived experience in their field of work. And the reason I got connected with them was enrolling myself in an ARTC program or service called an Affinity space. And that's how I had the pleasure to meet Ari and what she does. And the reason why I invited her here today, or them here today, my apologies. The reason why I invited them here today was so that they could share their story on why it is what they do, the importance of an affinity space, and we'll get a little bit more into what that is in general. But Ari, thank you so much for being here and sharing your time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Amador.
Like I mentioned before, I met you through it was an ARTC, right? Arctic.
Yes, ARTIC stands for Anti-Racism and Trauma-Informed Care.
Yep. So I met them through one of those programs, and it was an affinity space where people of color, BIPOC folk can come together and kind of just hang out, chat. Do you want to give a quick explanation of what that affinity space is? And then we'll get into a more detailed later on, but just so people get background on that.
For sure. Yeah, the Arctic Affinity Spaces. So Rebecca Davis and Shay Lowry are the amazing founders of Arctic. And Rebecca Davis was actually one of my professors in graduate school at Portland State. And that's how we ended up getting connected. And she was somebody that's really passionate about educating organizations and individuals about both Rebecca and Shay are really passionate about educating folks on the tenets of white supremacy and basically critical race theory, because there's so much that goes into our capitalist positions that we are kind of underrepresented, and so much work that BIPOC folks have to do in order to educate their fellow, even other brown folks and white folks about the injustices and the, I don't like this word, but quote unquote microaggressions that we face. So Shay and Rebecca wanted to develop a training that would be available for organizations to be able to learn more about how white supremacy can show up in the organization. But then they also realized that our trainings are very full of valuable education, and also they can be a little intense. So we wanted to provide folks with a space to be able to just share and process the emotions, and also the learnings that they came with after going to the training. So we have a BIPOC affinity space that I host, and then my counterpart Holly does a white learning space for the white identified folks. And so the affinity space, as Rebecca told me, is just it's designed, it's really informal for folks to just be able to come together and be in affinity, because as Rebecca says, the magic of affinity is that the healing happens just by being in affinity, just by being in community with each other. We are healing, we are learning just by being together. And as I know you've experienced, Amador, we've had a lot of great epiphanies that have come about in the affinity space, and also really tender processing sessions where people are just talking about the racism and or discrimination that they experience, or just like challenges that come with the work and the way that we carry it as BIPOC folks. So that's kind of the goal of the affinity space.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I really enjoy it because for majority of the fitness spaces that I've attended, I've made it about me. I go in there and I just vent to y'all. I give you my opinions on how my work is going, anything that I see that I feel is unjust or that I'm questioning about, with regards to, why is this happening to me? Is this because of my race? Is this because I speak two languages? Is this because I'm a male? I go into these affinity spaces with an open mind and wanting understanding and clarity, and just to be able to like relate to people who look like me or may have had similar experiences by being a minority group. So it's meant a lot to me. I know over the years, at first I kind of just joined it, wasn't quite sure what to think of it. I was like, okay, it's just we're just sitting here. There's no like necessary real purpose, just because it can change with the depending on the who's in it and what we talk about and the direction it goes to. But I really like that because I can go in there and I can speak freely. I can say what I want to say, and I know that yourself and anyone else who's attending it is coming with like an open mind, not judgmental. So it really does mean a lot to me, and I thank you for that. And that's like one of the reasons that I invited you and asked that you be on our podcast, was to kind of share more about what the infinity space is. But before we get into that, I'm kind of just backtracking here a little bit. How can you tell me a little bit about yourself, on kind of maybe your education, where you started off, what you wanted to get into career wise before you met Arctic? Can we know a little bit about who Ari Bryce is?
Absolutely. I will try and be succinct. Yeah, basically, so my educational background, I got my undergrad. I'm originally from the East Coast. I got my undergrad at UMass Amherst in public health and education. I won't give you my whole life story, but I had some serious challenges with my health and healthcare in college. And so I was originally studying communication disorders, but just for like speech pathology and whatnot. But then after I had an intense hospital experience where I realized that I probably would have died if I hadn't had the access that I had had and the resources that my family was able to provide. I really wanted to redirect my purpose and education towards providing more equitable healthcare access and education for, especially for BIPOC folks and queer folks, intersectional folks with intersectional identities. I moved to Portland about 10 years ago, and with the ambitions of going to graduate school and also of just like getting out of the New England vibe, just trying something different. I really have loved living in the Pacific Northwest. It's been beautiful. I only recently, well, not too recently, I graduated in 2022 with my MSW, and that's how I met Rebecca Davis from Portland State. And I decided that I wanted to go into social work and being an actual clinician, being somebody who would be able to provide that access and support, instead of going from a more systems and macro level of like policy. I decided I wanted to go somewhere a little bit more micro in terms of my ability to provide a service instead of doing like policy and advocacy work. So right now I work as a therapist for Healing Tides Counseling. And so I just do the thing where I talk to folks. I identify as a narrative and multi-generational family systems therapist. So that's my day job, is that I just do therapy with ideally mostly BIPOC and queer clients. I do have a couple of white identified folks, but my focus is more with intersectional folks who are queer, trans, Black, BIPOC, any folks with those identities. And then in the evenings and afternoons, I work with Arctic to do some of the trainings and also to support with some facilitation. And then I facilitate the affinity spaces for different organizations that contract with us. So, so yeah, that's a little bit about my professional background. I like all the Pacific Northwest things, going outside, video games, reading. I've got a bunch of pets and a lovely partner here in North Portland. And yeah, I think that's about me. That's basically my vibe.
Okay, no, I dig it. I like it. No, that's great. Just because I like to ask that question, and it came up to me because I mentioned this before, but uh, I like to kind of see and hear where people come from prior to what they currently do, because I would not be friends with who I am today back in high school. So if I met myself in high school right now, me and him would not get along. We wouldn't have the same views. I would never imagine myself in this position that I am right now, working as a harm reduction specialist, if I was still in high school. So it's really interesting to see kind of like the reasonings behind why people do what they do, and kind of that journey that they've had along their life. And maybe it was a short term flip around. Maybe it took them 10, 15 years to figure out who they are and what they actually truly believe in. So I find it really important to like kind of ask these questions to get to know who you are. And maybe you've had like a really challenging and a confusing upbringing that, you know, it took you 10 years to figure out this is what I truly makes me happy. This is what I truly want to do. I could say this now, that this is something that I really want to do and I invest all my energy into. I drive an hour to work every day. I drive an hour home every day. So instead of working from 8 to 5, I'm talking going from 7 to 6. And currently right now with the daylight savings things, I wake up in the dark, get to the office by sunrise. I leave the office by sunset, and I'm back home by dark. So my whole daylight is in the office and interacting with people, and I wouldn't change it. I fell in love with the job, and it really does mean a lot to me. So I find it really important to understand the individual and why it is that they do what they do, and kind of the process that it took to get along with that. Um, but again, see, I like to make things about me. I'm doing it again. It's a me thing. Something I need to work on is not just making it about myself, but I have you here, so I want to give the floor to you. So when you started working with Arctic and then doing these meetings, did you have a particular mind or goal in mind about what you wanted to do or what you wanted to accomplish?
Uh, well, also, Amador, I do appreciate the way that you bring yourself into the space. Like that's always I guess your power and strength, and I always want to uplift our fellow BIPOC folks in doing that. So I always appreciate your shares. I'm not gonna lie, I just am a huge fan of Rebecca Davis. She is, if y'all have the opportunity to Google her, she is an amazing therapist and educator and advocate and facilitator in all over the country, but especially in the Pacific Northwest. I know now that she's based in Portland, and like I said, she was my professor, and also Black and Indigenous and queer as well. And I just really always appreciated the things that I learned from her. She is just like full of wisdom, and I always just wanted to continue to learn more from her, find out more about where she came from, how she arrived at this place. And also, I was able to talk to her a lot about my frustrations in education around like how white and superior the educational practices can be, and how we are taught, with as a therapist, we're taught how to use the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM, in order to diagnose and treat our clients. But it's a book that's been written by white people for white people. And so that was always something that I really struggled with in my education. And so professors like Rebecca Davis, Michelle Lewis, and others have been able to really help support me with seeing the fullness that I can bring to the work. So yeah, Rebecca sought me out at just needing, she's an amazing person, and also, of course, pulled in a lot of different directions. So I think that she was looking just to get some extra support with Arctic. So she asked me if I could come on board to help with the affinity spaces and trainings. And I was more than happy to join her team and to continue learning from her outside of school. And this is after I graduated as well. So yeah, the missions and goals of Arctic are very personally aligned with me, about just like teaching about anti-racism, trauma-informed care, and also about teaching folks about the tenets of white supremacy and otherization and the ways that they affect us in the workplace. So I'd say that the values of Arctic are very close to my personal values, and the trainings are definitely intense. There's like we do like 5-hour trainings sometimes. So that's why I really appreciate doing the affinity spaces that I do monthly, because they're not structured, they're not scripted. They're just an opportunity for folks to come in and be in the space. And that's just one of my passions, is and just like deep pleasures, is to be able to provide safe spaces. Like that's kind of one of my main goals, I feel like, in life, and my purposes, to be able to cultivate and facilitate safe spaces. And that's one of the missions of Arctic.
Yeah, no, that's great. And that word safe space, I've never really felt that it held its value other than the affinity space that I attend with yours. I've attended countless meetings where it's like it's a safe space, say what you want, say what's on your mind. This is a safe, comfortable area. And looking and scanning the room, getting the vibe, I was like, if I say something right now, the conversations I had with people prior to me asking my question is going to change. People who would have wanted to work with me prior are not going to want to work with me now if I ask a certain question. So I've never felt that any safe space was truly a safe space. But in this affinity space, it was the first time I was able to sort of say vent and just speak my mind. Not only because you're strangers, I find it a lot easier for myself to speak to a stranger, because I'm never going to run into you at the grocery store and see you every day. I see you once a month. So that kind of relieves the stress, but also understanding why you're doing what you're doing, the reasons that a lot of people who attend those meetings attend, listening to them, hearing their stories. It truly made it a safe space for me, even here at work. And I don't mind sharing this. I know it's kind of like an inside joke, but we say it's a safe space. We can say what we want to like help better whatever it is that we got going on at work. But then you're scared, like, oh, what if the boss doesn't like this? What if my supervisor finds out that I don't like this or that? How's that going to affect me? So it's not technically a safe space, but we all say it's a safe space. And that's what I like about the affinity space is I've never felt like any other like Zoom setting meeting has offered that sense of security that I have with the folks that I met in your meeting that you hold. So I really want to applaud you for that. Because I'm not afraid to ask questions, uncomfortable questions. I feel like if you believe in something truly, you should be able to speak your mind. And for those of you who can't see, and I hope you don't mind me sharing, your shirt does say "Silence is death," which
I know
is
silence equals death. I thought it would be
yeah,
appropriate for today's show.
yeah, absolutely. Uh, if you can't speak your mind, then how are you gonna expect anything to change for the better? And that's what I really stand for. So I like to be able to ask those uncomfortable questions. I like to be devil's advocate because it gets you somewhere. If you're always agreeing, then nothing's gonna change, right? So that's what I really appreciate. And then for those listening as well, if they aren't familiar with the term BIPOC, Ari, do you kind of want to give a brief explanation of what BIPOC is and kind of where it came from?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Also, I just wanted to also make sure I clarify, because for folks, because safe space is a term that's really often thrown out and thrown about. And like you were saying, Amador, it's really not, folks don't always talk about what that means to cultivate a safe space. So I feel like with Arctic, we're often trying to cultivate safer spaces. And that's like usually our line in this work, is like, how can we build community and build intentionality and consent to so that folks can come and feel like they are safer? Because honestly, the myth there is a huge myth of safety, especially in our work and in our lived experiences as BIPOC folks. And BIPOC is an acronym actually for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. Thank you for asking, because I also wanted to clarify that I also identify as Black and queer myself. And so when we say that we're wanting to be in BIPOC affinity, that's basically all brown folks. All folks identify in the BIPOC diaspora. So folks that are non-white identified is usually what we're going for with that community.
So getting into some more detail about the affinity space, uh, I know we've touched on it here and there in the beginning, and so we're towards the middle of this, but I really wanted to put a big emphasis on this particular meeting just because it has the most impact for myself, and I find it the most interesting. Is how would you explain it to someone who's never heard the term affinity space or BIPOC affinity space in just like layman terms? I know working in this industry, so to say, or in this field, I kind of get what it's hinting to or what the kind of overall goal is. But to someone who's never heard about this, now someone who doesn't see these words BIPOC or necessarily know what affinity is, how would you explain that to just like uh in layman terms?
For sure. Absolutely. And I'm so glad you're asking about this, Amador, because I want folks like Arctic and other organizations, like they do not have, like affinity space is definitely not a like a trademarked word. Like we want folks to create affinity spaces wherever they are. Obviously, you know, properly, ideally properly facilitated, and in truth, like actually built towards building that safer community. It takes a lot of intentionality and pre-work in order to really cultivate that safer space that we do with Arctic. But in theory, anybody can be in affinity. What I think we're going for with Arctic is that we want folks to be able to just come into a space where there is no agenda except to be in healing. I'm very outcomes oriented. I think especially because of my like public health background. So it was really fun to talk to Rebecca when I was new and with Arctic to be like, okay, what do I do for the affinity space? Like, how do I facilitate? What are the questions I need to ask? Like, what are other things I need to do so we can get something out of this? Like, I can be, it's sometimes like my own reflection of whiteness that I've been working through. It's just like feeling like we need to do a thing, get something out of it. And Rebecca was so wonderful in the way that they explained that, like I said at the beginning, the magic of affinity is just being in affinity. When you are together with other people with similar identities, that safety and that comfort, knowing, like you were saying, that there's not going to be a supervisor to judge you. There's not going to be any kind of formal HR uh, complaints or claims that are going to be rising out of just talking and just being in space is so beautiful. Like I know you've seen. Also, shout out to Crescencia, amazing person in y'all's community. Like she was one of the first people to come to the affinity spaces, and we just talked, just the two of us, and so like that was also a beautiful thing. You can be in affinity with just two people or in a large group. I think that our largest affinity space was like maybe 8 folks at its largest. And for the ORIACT and EOCIL affinity spaces, in all of our affinity spaces, they're drop-in based. So folks can really just come as needed. I also really appreciate like organizations that partner with Arctic, because even if folks don't come to the affinity space, that time is blocked out on their calendar every month. So I'm sure as you've experienced, Amador, there's some months that you're not able to come. And
Yeah.
I just really want folks, like if they're not able to come, to use that hour for whatever is going to be serving them. Like even if you need to be in affinity with yourself for that, just for an hour to get a break from work. We don't really talk about the ways that we are, like you were saying earlier, working extra hours, putting in more emotional labor than some of our counterparts, even fellow folks in our own community. And so just having spaces carved out that are only centered on our own healing and experiences is an opportunity to share, an opportunity to listen and to provide support. I've also really appreciated getting wisdom from some elders. I feel like, especially like you and I think Amador are similarly aged. I think that our generation is woefully lacking in our connection to elders. And so being able to connect with folks who have been in the field longer than us, who have experience and who maybe didn't have some of these opportunities, I think that that is really invaluable. I think that I really appreciate that in affinity spaces. It's just like the wealth of wisdom that comes into the room. And some folks are just there just to kick it for the hour. And some folks are there because, like you've experienced, they're just like, I am dealing with some racism at work and I do not know what to do. No one else is labeling it as racism. Nobody else is labeling it as discrimination or otherization. And I feel really lost. And I just want to talk to somebody about it. And I really appreciate that it's not necessarily, it's not an outcomes driven meeting. It's about just being able to be in connection. So even if Like I've been in spaces sometimes where we've been completely quiet for 20 minutes, not saying anything. But that has also just felt really therapeutic in that we can just be together and that there's nothing to be said. But we are both just by being in the space, acknowledging that we need a place to be able to just breathe as BIPOC folks and to be able to get some space from all the troubles and the frustrations that we are dealing with on a regular basis.
Yeah, for sure. And that's amazing. I know personally, again, bringing it back to myself, because I love myself and I'm proud of that. When I'm home with my family and I see people that look like me, I'm comfortable. I don't need to talk to them. If I'm in an elevator for even just 10 seconds with a group of Caucasians, I'm not comfortable. It's only 10 seconds. I'm just in the elevator with them. I feel so uncomfortable being in there. But let there be 10 Hispanics that walk in there that aren't related to me, I'm totally fine. There's something that bonds us. And even if it's 10 seconds of silence, I feel so much more comfortable being in there just because that's how I can see myself in them in some regard rather than if I saw. Now, obviously, I don't want to hold any bias or negativity towards any group of people, but it's just something that's ingrained in me to feel more comfortable with people who look like me, sound like me, might have the same cultural background as me, which is really really evident. I also wanted to ask you, like, how long have you been doing these Arctic spaces yourself? Because I know I've attended some with Summer. I think I'm forgetting her last name, but they went by Summer, Sommer. Rebecca Summers. Oh, maybe that was her last name, Rebecca Summers or
Or
Summers
Dave.
something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I attended it with her uh like a year or two ago. And then how long have you been doing the Affinity space now for?
Wow, that's a good question. I guess it's been a year and a half now, which is wild to think about.
A
Yeah,
year and a half.
yeah.
Okay.
I can't believe it's been that long.
Yeah, no, I mean it certainly feels like a lot shorter just because those interactions I have are a lot meaningful. So they stay with me a lot longer. So it doesn't feel like it's too far out in the distance. But the reason I was asking was what kind of trends have you seen in those infinity spaces? Not trying to like single anyone out or like disclose secrets because obviously it's a safe space, but just like in a more general sense, what have you noticed that are reoccurring issues in like workplaces throughout like the state or the country or wherever people are joining from?
Absolutely. And yeah, I'm glad that you said that because yeah, that's the other value of the affinity space that it's confidential and that folks can come in and be able to be in community and know that what happens in that group is going to stay there, which I really appreciate. And because we are working like, Arctic is a private LLC. And so since we are contracting with organizations, very often nonprofits, but sometimes corporations as well, we have the opportunity, like if folks want, I always offer folks to have that time to report back. That's also something that I really value. So like I mentioned, Rebecca Davis is my supervisor and one of the founders of Arctic. She and Shay will be in community with the management because for example, for an organization, maybe they're just wanting to broaden their education about anti-racism and trauma-informed care. Maybe they are noticing that there's a lot of HR complaints and microaggressions happening that they just don't know how to face. So they maybe did some research on like, how can we get some support with DEI work, diversity, equity, inclusion? And so they will find us and kind of seek out that educational piece, which is why we do the training. And so I feel that, oh, I totally lost my train of thought. What was the original question you asked me?
It was kind of what are the general trends
Oh,
that
the
you see
trend.
in these affinity spaces, just to like for people to be aware of what might be happening that they aren't necessarily like picking up on. Like you mentioned microaggressions, maybe there's some stuff um in the hierarchy of the organization that can be like white supremacist based or racially biased in some regards, just so that way people can who are listening can kind of look into their own workplace, see if those same kind of hints or clues are being, formulated within their organization. I obviously don't want to single out anyone's stories or experiences that we've had in there, but I feel it would kind of be helpful to just get the overall trend of what you've been seeing from the various people across the state or the country that join these affinity spaces.
Thank you so much, Amador. I got excited talking about the report back that I forgot that the question was about trends.
No, it's all good.
Anywho, yes, the report. So I appreciate the report back because my supervisors, Rebecca and Shay, will meet with management, and management is the ones that sought us out to be like, what can we do? We want to deepen our understanding of anti-racism and trauma-informed care. We want to learn. So Rebecca and Shay will meet with them to be able to talk about ways that they can implement more structural supports to be able to support their employees better, support their client base, whatever that might be. And also there's a time for folks in our spaces to report back. And so that's the time where it's like, okay, this is anything that you want to get to management, anything that you're like, I haven't been able, like you mentioned, like, I wish I could talk about this to my supervisor, but there hasn't been a safe space for me to be able to do that, to be able to talk about the fact that one of the biggest trends is isolation, as I know we've talked about with you, Amador. It's just like feeling really isolated and feeling very much tokenized in organizations as being a very when there's limited BIPOC folks in a very overly white organization, it is exhausting. It's really, really, really frustrating. So being able to talk about, for example, like, I really need there to be some support with hiring and retaining BIPOC staff members, because a lot of our folks are swimming in seas of isolation. Like, maybe they're the only BIPOC person at their organization, which is inherently like a problem. Or maybe they're like one of two folks and they feel like a pressure to be able to connect with that one other BIPOC person, even though they may not have anything in common. So I feel like I'm grateful for that time for folks to report back so that they can get a message to their supervisors that it's like, this is a race-based or discrimination-based thing that I want y'all to work on. And you said that you wanted to know, and this is an opportunity for me to share. And luckily those shares are still anonymous. So I will like write down what folks want to report back. I'll forward those report backs to Rebecca, and Rebecca will tell them to the management of being like, these are the things that your staff are saying that they need. These are the ways that they're suffering and they need more support. So yeah, I would say that some of the trends that I've seen are mostly around, like I said, just feeling really, folks just feeling very isolated, especially, again, I love being living in the Pacific Northwest. I am so grateful for the ways that I've been welcomed in this part of the country. And also, as you know, Oregon is a very white state. I won't get into all the history, but there's a very broad and deep racist history in Oregon. And so that is definitely can be seen in some of our more rural, especially in some of our more rural locations, and also here in Portland, where I live as well. So I think that with such disparities in numbers, folks are really experiencing a lot of challenges, being really isolated, being like one of few BIPOC folks at their organizations, feeling tokenized, feeling like they are only there to meet a certain number, or they're only there because they speak two languages, and there is a like crushing number of folks who don't speak that language. And so there's a lot of pressure for folks to be able to serve an entire community because they speak two languages, when really that is completely unreasonable ask for just one person to be able to do. Some other things that I know have come up are also interpersonal experiences of racism and discrimination. And like I said, that word that I don't love of microaggressions, because I should say that I don't like it, because racism, it's like a death by a million tiny cuts. Microaggressions, I think that sometimes that word can downplay the impact that racism can have on us. But when we talk about microaggressions, we're talking about things that happen in between individuals and or even between leadership and staff, that are things that are sometimes said offhand, things that aren't like overtly racist, but clearly have the implication of discrimination, and also inevitably harm the marginalized individual. So people will talk about things that are going on in between them and other coworkers, things that are going on between them and supervisors, challenges, ways that they're not feeling heard. I feel like also just like the biggest trend, because there's really, most of the time, there's not even a report back. Like, I'm grateful that we have that time at the end of session to be like, is there anything you want the bosses to know? But really, folks are just frustrated. Folks just really need, that is the thing that is the most needed, is a space that they can just be in to be able to get information and get somebody to be like, yeah, you're not crazy. That is really messed up, that thing that happened to you. And like the relief that I feel from folks just getting that validation. I feel like that's my main job, is validating and affirming both in both of my jobs, folks for their experiences in this world. And I'm just so grateful that I can do that, because that's something that I really needed to help unlock my hurt so that I can continue my process of healing. So I feel like, yeah, being able to just get some things off of folks' chests, to be able to like bounce some ideas off of fellow BIPOC folks, and to also kind of test the temperature and seeing like, is this happening at my location? Is this happening at your location as well? And kind of being able to share resources. People have shared books, YouTube videos, personal work that have really been able to impact them. So it's also a great opportunity for folks to just share resources. But yeah, I feel like honestly, the biggest trend is just a space to vent that I've
Yeah.
seen.
Yeah, no, and that's great. And like one of that thing about the reporting situation, uh, and you mentioned her Chrissy is also a part of that. She's my direct supervisor. So with her being in there and seeing how much she really loves this affinity space and how much I love this affinity space, it's made me a lot more comfortable to report everything to Chrissy whenever a problem does arise. And she makes it super easy for us. We have weekly team meetings where we get together and she gives us time to talk about any difficulties that we've had. Is there anything that we need fixed? Is there anything that she can look into? And she takes on so much, supervising not just myself, but all of my other team members. And she does a really great job of making sure that we have our voices heard in some degree. Sometimes we only get 5 minutes to vent, and sometimes we get 20 or 30, but she always offers us that space. And I feel really comfortable going to Chrissy and letting her know, like, hey, this is happening at work. Can something change? Or I'm having problems in this area. What do you think? And it's been really easy. And she's made a really great job. Even this past at the end of last year in December, our whole organization had a team meeting. And I believe it was the last 30-ish, 20 minutes of the whole organization meeting that the head boss asked us what it is that we like to change or what it is that we'd like to see in the future. And I thought that was really great and amazing for him to do that and ask our opinion. Because sometimes when you're working, you feel like you don't have a say because you're not the top dog, so to say, right? You're just an employee. You're here to do the job that you got assigned to do. And there's not much like that. But no, he gave us the floor and asked, like, what are some of the goals that you have for the future? What is something that you want to see us improve on as a whole, as an organization? And I thought that was so powerful and so beautiful that he gave us the opportunity to do that, because then we can actually grow, learn, share ideas, and be as creative as possible with what we do to try to help the people that really need it and have been marginalized, underserved, discriminated, stigmatized against, or whatever it might be. So it's so amazing to see that aspect of being able to report what is important, being able to report what needs to be changed. And even in these meetings, and I'd like to touch more on it because I think it would help people, is growing up in a small town, I always had the idea of trying to justify people's reasons for acting a certain way towards me, or oh, it's just because I'm Hispanic that they're trying to accommodate for me, not knowing that it was kind of they were insulting me in the sense. A perfect example of this is normally in Hispanic culture, you don't use utensils, it's usually finger or tortillas. You'd rip it up with your hands and eat it. That's what I still do to this day. And my friends, I still consider them friends. And I'm pretty lenient on that just because I've known them for so long, that I get that they were making fun of me, which they shouldn't do. But big long story behind that. But they, for a meal, decided to make food, and they gave me tortillas only, and they were eating with forks and knives. And they're like, "Oh, we were just doing because we know that." They weren't actually really, and I thought like, oh, that they were being kind, when in reality they were doing it because that's how I eat, and they thought that it was funny that I don't use utensils like they do, and I didn't understand that. And I feel like in these affinity spaces, when I go in, I can share my thoughts with you guys, and then I can get some clarity, and I can get different points of view from similar people, from people maybe who are Hispanic, people who are of color, who be like, okay, yeah, that was actually what they were doing was wrong. You shouldn't have to accept that. You shouldn't have to tolerate that or put up with it. Uh, I tolerate and put up with it because I've been friends with them since I was, I don't know, 10. And I know in that moment they were kind hearted, they're doing it as a joke, but to someone else that might not be as a joke. And I find that balance of what's acceptable as a joke, what's appropriate as a joke. Obviously, I don't think they would ever do that to someone they don't know or just met. But to me, since they've known me for so long, they thought it was funny, and I thought it was like, yeah, okay. I didn't think anything of it, and then I share that story with others. Like, oh, they were definitely just making fun of you because you don't use forks and knives when you eat your food. It was like it just didn't click. So having this infinity space and being able to join it and share my opinions, like, okay, this happened to me today at work. Um, like, what do you all think that meant? Like, should I be offended? Like, I don't know if I should be offended. I'm confused. Were they meaning that in like a derogatory or discriminatory way? Am I being taken advantage of? So that affinity space really helps me with that aspect too, is being able to get clarification on some of the stuff, because it's hard to do this on your own. I know growing up too, my dad faced an incredible amount of racism until this day. He doesn't speak any English. That learning English has been the hardest thing for him to do. He's almost 46 or 45 now. Sorry, Dad. 46 or 45, doesn't know any English, and his guard up against white males is so high. So high. He has no trust for them at all. It would take him an incredible amount of time to be able to trust someone who's white. And through that, that's how I learned to act. That's how I learned, is my guard is always up. You're white. Yeah, you say you care for me. You say you'll lend me a hand. I don't know you. I just see you based on the color of your skin. That's how I grew up, is to judge you based on the color of your skin. And so my perception of people is clouded by that. So going into these infinity spaces and talking to y'all who maybe had a different life growing up would be like, no, you're right. That was messed up of them to do that. No, I think you might be misinterpreting it, and that's okay. And I accept that. I love to take responsibility. I will always admit when I'm wrong, if I'm wrong. And so if I'm wrong, I would love to know, because then I can make the situation much worse than it actually is. So that's a really good plus side of having these affinity spaces, is being able to kind of bounce ideas between people who think similarly. Uh, and kind of going into my next question, then, being a person of color and you yourself working with a lot of people in the BIPOC community, how 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 would you tell someone, or kind of explain to someone, that they should be confident in their skin? They should be confident as an individual, because I'm sure you get that a lot as being a therapist, like you said, that people aren't confident in being brown, that they feel less than others. I know for a period of my life, I wasn't very confident. I was like, they're not going to pick me. I'm brown. Why wouldn't they just pick all their white friends? Uh, so how do you go about that, and explaining that it's okay to be confident, it's okay to be brown, it's okay to be black, it's okay to be, anything under the rainbow?
Oh, such a deep question, Amador. I appreciate that. Um, I think that I would say, but the first thing that's coming up for me is that the ways that we self-deprecate, the ways that we are hard on ourselves, the ways that we have our own self-hatred and internalized white supremacy, it's really sneaky. It's not like, that's why I think it's so important to talk about the ways, both in our trainings and also in our affinity spaces and in common conversation, to talk about the specific ways and feelings, always with a therapist, and the feelings that are attached to having experiences of otherization. It's not always like being called a racial slur. Like, I feel like that's like the myth of like, we talk about that in our training. It's like there's this myth that white folks and also brown folks will think that you can only experience racism if you're being targeted, if there's a racial slur, if you're facing like some kind of physical assault. And I feel like the things that I process in my sessions and also in my affinity spaces are the more insidious ways that we put ourselves down for not feeling like that we are really adequate. So there's things will come up around folks thinking that, like, I think something that you mentioned is like feeling like putting something that feels gross or feeling like hurtful and just putting it to the side and being like, oh, well, there's very much often the conversation of intention versus impact. Like, oh, well, this person didn't intend to hurt me. So they were intending to say a joke, or they were intending to do what they thought was best. But the impact is different than what the intention was. So sometimes I think that well-meaning BIPOC folks will be like, oh, well, my friend, even people within, again, because not all skin folk are kinfolk. Even BIPOC folks can commit acts of harm to our own communities. But there will be times where people will be like, oh, well, this person didn't intend to hurt me, so I'm going to give them a pass on this action. And it's like, sometimes it's just talking about, like, even though they didn't intend this is how it felt for you. This was the impact that it was felt by you. How do you feel about it? And then when folks kind of connect with, like, honestly, yeah, I did not feel great about that interaction. I didn't make me feel seen or heard or valued when this person talked to me in this way, or when they didn't ask me for my opinion, or when they went over my head to talk to my supervisor. So I feel like folks will very often be getting just like a bad feeling about a situation, and then they'll bring that either to my individual sessions, like as a therapist, or they'll bring it to affinity spaces where they'll be like, this guy thing happened and it kind of made me feel weird, and I'll be like, hold up, what? And I will be with them in that frustration, in that anger, in that sadness, in that grief around the ways that they feel that they've been completely dismissed for having these feelings. So I think that the power is connecting with folks on the feelings. And that's, again, I want to make sure I hammer home on this, that that's why it's so important to not just be like, okay, it's racist at your organization, and then bounce. Like, it's so important to have care and to hold communities while you're educating them on the ways that we still, as a nation, like, we've had international organizations working with us. It's not just in America. Like, this is also all around the world, where white supremacy reigns as professionalism. Like, it's disguised as professionalism, as being on time to work, as being having a certain decorum in your place of work. It's very much, very often disguised as how you just need to be the right kind of person and not actually a true person to yourself. So I think that creating those safer spaces and giving folks education about why we're getting into these feelings, and then providing them with supports and community, because we're getting into some tender spots. So inviting folks to get into those tender spots, validating them, affirming them, and then ideally giving them folks resources, whether it be me giving some advice or some experiences that I've had. But most of the time it's not me, as I'm sure you've experienced, Amador. It's mostly because I try to talk as little as possible in the affinity spaces. I'm just there to hold the space. But very often it'll be other participants that are providing their wisdom and their experiences to be like, this happened to me as well, and I don't want to see you going through the same thing. Or this happened to me as well, and I wish I had known to advocate for myself in this way. And sometimes you have to, like, the only way you can learn is by going through an experience when you're in isolation. But when you're in community, you can share that knowledge, and people don't have to all reinvent the wheel when they're trying to get liberty and justice for themselves. So I feel like that, I think, is one of the most important things when I'm wanting to talk to folks about how to love themselves and how to see themselves, is to do that tender work with not just me, obviously, but also with their own personal communities around, like, what do I really feel about this? Like, we are so encouraged to tune out because of the overwhelming cacophony that comes from white supremacy and otherization, that we're not always encouraged to slow down and be like, how do I actually feel about this, though? Because that's what whiteness wants. It doesn't want us to slow down and stop the status quo. The status quo, the way that things are right now, it serves white folks. Like, that is how it works. And so when we slow down, we're actually checking in with ourselves, with our bodies, which is also a whole nother thing about decolonizing the trauma in our bodies, to be like, how do I feel about this? And then being like, you know what, I realized that this does not feel good, and now I need to take action. And so if I need to take action, what do I do now? And so then there's also that space to ask people, like, what do I do? I don't know what to do. I know that this feels gross. I know that this is not acceptable, but I don't feel empowered to be able to make a change. I don't feel like there's support to be able to do that. So folks can kind of talk to myself and other community members about, like, what things have been successful for them and what has worked, and things that have not worked, because we also sometimes will try and follow the rules and do things above board and are still slapped on the hand for it. So there's always ways of figuring out, how do we engage with this beast of white supremacy and also maintain our spirits and ourself and our self-love.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of like resembling what trauma informed care is figuring out what trauma is there that's causing these issues or these barriers in a person. How have you seen trauma informed care either being like implemented through any of your Arctic programs or services, or even in your personal work as a therapist? Do you implement a trauma informed um, standard when you are doing like any of these meetings, trainings, etc.?
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing up the TIC part of Arctic, because I definitely identify as a trauma informed care counselor and therapist, and we definitely are looking to provide trauma informed care in our affinity spaces and also in our trainings. And also, which is a challenging job constantly, like, you know, we're always continuing to learn. We're wanting to teach our organizations also how they can utilize trauma informed care in their work. So we don't claim
Yeah.
to be able to do a full education on what that means, but we can at least provide an introduction and a pathway to being able to deepen trauma informed care in organizations and also in community. But I think that the biggest thing with trauma informed care is just acknowledging that you may not know someone's full story. You may not know what someone's been through, but they still deserve dignity and decency and an opportunity to be able to speak. So I feel like that's how I will try my best to embody trauma informed care in affinity spaces and also in my personal work, is by being really curious, coming from a space of curiosity with folks if they're talking about some challenges that they've faced. I feel like also knowing that there is a wealth of experience. Like, I think that I appreciate being a queer person and acknowledging the power of the spectrum, like also knowing that people are coming with a full spectrum of experiences, and it's not always so, like, we can't always anticipate or assume what somebody is going through, and sometimes we need to actually anticipate that this person has dealt with more challenges than what we've been through. And so providing that care and
Yeah.
through our education and through our awareness of systems, of through our awareness of the challenges that come with different identities held. I think that awareness is one of the most important tenets of trauma informed care, is knowing that everybody comes with their own story and their own experiences of love and also harm. And so wanting to meet people where they're at in those experiences and just providing a space to be able to like talk openly about it, and also
Yeah.
be curious again and finding out what is something that you need to be able to get out of this situation. How best can I support you? And again,
Yeah.
always slowing things down is also trauma informed care, I feel.
Yeah, super key is making it about them, because it is about them. I can't uh I haven't lived your life. I don't know your traumas and how that affects you. And especially for people who excuse me, aren't familiar with what like trauma informed care, it's basically assessing. I know if you I think if you Google search it, it just says, instead of asking what is wrong, it's the reasoning behind it and like the past that leads you to do something. For example, if I were someone who uses substances, like, well, that's what's wrong with you. Let's fix you not using substances. Let's cut you clean. Trauma informed care, it kind of goes deeper. Okay, why are you using these substances? What is it doing for you that enables you to want to keep doing it? Is there something in your childhood? Is it relationship? Is it financial status? What's going on? What is the trauma, and addressing the trauma first in order to help alleviate other barriers or things. And that's how I kind of would explain what trauma informed care is. And correct me if I'm wrong, please, because I think it is really important that people understand what trauma informed care is and how beneficial it is for someone. I could say that, someone who might have lived in a household where alcohol was really prevalent might have a different experience to someone else who grew up in a similar environment. Maybe they saw alcohol as being really bad, it had a negative impact on them, yet they might have lived in similar situations. The trauma affects people so differently. So you have to be able to assess what is actually traumatic experience for them, and learning how to build off of that to better the individual's life, as long as they're the ones leading it and you're not like forcing it onto them, right? Kind of moving a little bit further along here, do have another question that I wanted to ask you is, when in these types of meetings where we're feeling uh, suppressed or feeling like we can't ask a certain question, how would you go about that? How would you tell someone of color, this is how you ask a question, to not be afraid? Because I have that hard time of like, I don't know how to ask a question. Is it appropriate for me? Does it fit the topic? How would you tell someone of color or someone of a minority group or marginalized group that it's okay for you to ask these questions? How would you go about asking them or explaining that to them?
Absolutely. I really appreciate your line of questioning, Amador. I think that setting up the space to be really open. That's why I very intentionally just talk, like when I do my intro in the affinity space, I just talk about that this is just a space for us to be in affinity, and that the magic of affinity is being in affinity. So I'm just here as a facilitator, and that the way that the group will be directed and guided is by the individuals. So I really just try and just depressurize the space. I feel like, again, we go into meetings and we're used to agendas, we're used to outcomes, we're used to needing to get something done at the end of this meeting. We need to make sure we know what the plan of action is. And so I think that just creating a space and also having practice, like being in community, it takes time. Like I know that, as I'm sure you've experienced, like it's different coming to the affinity space the first time versus coming regularly. Because like the first time we're sometimes I feel like there's definitely an energy of sometimes like stress and pressure. Folks don't always know what to expect. Sometimes there's just like that anxiety about not knowing. And also that we've all experienced so much, all of us, I know, have experienced so much harm. And I'm sure there's a common theme of folks experiencing groups and communities where they say that they want to like support you as a BIPOC person, but unfortunately they cause you more harm. So I think that folks have a very righteous and rightful like feeling of I don't want to say trepidation, but just of mindfulness before coming into groups, because there's a guard that is up clearly, because we're asking folks to be coming and be vulnerable. And some folks, like they could have been fired or formally disciplined for things that they've shared in this space in other spaces. So they're just like, I've been burned before, so I really want to make sure that they get the vibe before sharing. So I think that I also, as a personal practice, I really like to kind of break through that like awkward glass, like doing like an icebreaker with folks, just like talk to folks about like what they're going through. I try and make sure I acknowledge whiteness in this space. I think that also folks, once they get to the group, feel like a little bit of a relief seeing me in my brown skin. They're just like, okay, yes, I am reminded that this is a group just for BIPOC folks. I think that they appreciate that. And also, I just really try to make sure that I de-stress and I know that there's a word for it that I'm missing right now, but that's okay. But I just try and destructure the space so that folks feel like they can feel comfortable however they need to bring whatever they can. And also there's no hurry. Like I talked to you about that time that like one time I just sat in silence with somebody who had their camera off. Like I was like, I'm here either way for the whole hour. So if that means that you just want to be able to be here in community, that's totally fine for me. And so sometimes I've noticed that folks will need to come to a multiple affinity space and not share. And then once they get the vibe and they realize that, okay, this seems like actually like a pretty legit space, then they feel like they're more comfortable to share. So sometimes it's being patient. Sometimes it's taking time. And I think also like kind of decolonizing the space really is just being like open to like, we could talk about dogs, we could talk about racism, we could talk about the weather, like whatever it is. And also I think that personally, I think that it's also been helpful that I've been able to like follow through on things. I think that, you know, again, it's very therapeutic to have a regular offering. So like the fact that we meet monthly, folks are able to see my face, people to see each other's faces every month. Like that is healing. That is something that allows people to continue to open up, is being like, this is consistent. This is something I know what to expect out of this space. And also maybe they've gotten wisdom from people and they're like, damn, like that was amazing. I was able to really learn from this. And it gives them the opportunity to be like, huh, what have I actually been going through? I've just been kind of like following the motions of my life, but I haven't really noticed some of these things. But now I want to like turn on my noticing lens and start to look inward a little bit more. So I just try and yeah. So I guess that's a long story short version of saying like decolonizing the space in the best way that we can and opening up folks to be able to be however they need to be is, I think, one of the most important keys for supporting people and wanting to feel comfortable talking about some really intense stuff. Even I have been like so grateful and humbled at the ways that people have been like open to talking about intense things because they're just like, I have nowhere else to go. And so this is what it's going to have to be.
Yeah, and that's great. And I do want to be respectful of your time, but I have 4 questions here that I'd like to just do like a rapid fire thing before we sign off, because obviously don't want to take your entire morning over there. And maybe in the future we can come back and do another recording. But I have 4 questions here. You can take your time on them. You don't have to answer them like super quick by any means, but they're just questions that I wanted to ask prior, and then some questions that came up during our conversation that I think would be kind of interesting to know. So as far as the Affinity space, where can people join that aren't part of an organization? So rather than being a part of an organization and joining Arctic or like enrolling in that, so just a normal person who's just living their normal life, where they can they go to join an Affinity space? And if there is no dedicated like community Affinity space, how do they start one, or how do they begin that conversation to start one with fellow people?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for helping us to hype up Arctic right now. I would definitely route folks to our website, which is ar/tic.org. They'll be able to get a lot of information about what we do, some of our offerings, some of our pricing scales. We're very open to working with different organizations and individuals with pricing and sliding scales to be able to really provide what's best for the group that is interested. My RE side wants to say like affinity spaces everywhere, but I also am like, okay, all right, you got to make sure you don't open this up too broad, because like we were talking about at the beginning, full circle, we are doing our best to provide safer spaces. And so I think that having that pre-work, the work during, and then like the follow-up, it's all very much part of what makes the space feel safer and braver. And I think that there's a lot of challenges, and I think that we are also facing, this is a conversation for another day, but there's a lot of challenges that we face. And I think it's very much the status quo right now, where organizations are trying to do DEI work, but without the appropriate follow through. They're trying, again, well-intentioned folks are just trying to solve white supremacy in their organization and are tiptoeing, but still tiptoeing around the issues. So I think that really coming at the issue with the fullness that it deserves is really, really important. So again, like having that educational piece at the beginning to be like, this is what white supremacy is. This is how it shows up in the workplace. This is what critical race theory is. And this is how we can be mindful of it in order to create a safer workplace. So I think that I would encourage folks to connect with Rebecca, connect with Shay, and or connect with me and Holly, who also work with the affinity spaces, to find out what offerings that we can offer through Arctic to be able to deepen their understanding of these tenants at their organizations, and then also being able to provide more affinity spaces, either facilitated by Arctic or getting maybe a specific training saying, okay, we're looking to deepen our work, but through our own lens from an organization. Because again, we're contracting with organizations. So maybe somebody from within the organization wants to host an affinity space, that an additional space that time of the month. So I would just encourage them to talk to Rebecca and Shay about what they've been successful at and how they feel like it's the best to cultivate these spaces in a ways that's going to not only support their staff, but also to be able to most importantly, not reharm folks. So I would just encourage them to get more education and training specifically on facilitation and also on trauma-informed care and anti-racism work, because it can be really, really harmful when folks who don't have that training or that understanding of what it means to come into the space and then try to open up the space and be like, let's just get into things. It's like, it could be really harmful, as I'm sure you've experienced, where folks have said that it's safe to talk about racism, but then they maybe are overwhelmed, they're not trained or supported, because you can be really trained to facilitate, but if you're not getting the support you deserve, these meetings can actually cause more harm. So I think being mindful and getting training on how to facilitate is usually the best.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll make sure to reference your guys' website in our description as well. And I do want to make it just came into my mind is too, now that you said that about being able to ask these questions, but also being able to hold yourself accountable, and the organizations that you work for, and the movement that you stand for, hold them accountable. If they're saying it's a safe space, but you're noticing that it's not really a safe space, hold them accountable, check them, make sure that they understand that what they're saying is actually really discriminatory. I'll give a personal example of this. I was in a harm reduction coalition meeting. We're talking. There were some innuendos made throughout the presentation about certain types of people, rural town people, how they think and how they act. I grew up in a rural town. That's how I lived and how I act. That's how a majority of my friends and family are. I found that very rude and disrespectful that they're making these small innuendo jokes while saying it's a safe space. And if I were to raise my hand and be like, excuse me, I actually believe in those ideas, or I once believed in those, or a majority of my family believes in those, and you're laughing at them, you're saying that they're wrong, that they're crazy, that they're rude, you're insulting me. And now my relationship with everyone is compromised because they're all laughing at their joke that I don't agree with, or that I found really, really hurtful or rude or distasteful. That isn't a safe space, but they're preaching it's a safe space. So, and that's my biggest thing now is holding yourself accountable. If you're in an organization that says they're going to do something and they don't do it, if you're attending meetings where they say it's a safe space and it's not, let them know this isn't a safe space. Hold them accountable for their actions and what they say, because it can make a difference. It can keep people silenced, and they need to be heard. They will have ideas and stuff like that. So I just really wanted to put that in there and emphasize that, because it's something that I keep seeing as a constant theme in some of the meetings that I attend. Is it's a safe space, but yet they're still making jokes about people. They're still saying, oh, let's treat everyone with respect. Everyone has their story, lived experiences, yet they'll make fun of or laugh at or throw little jabs at certain groups of people and laugh and think that's okay. So it's important to hold like self accountability too, through that. And I wanted to share that just real briefly. So moving back on to some of the other questions, unless you want to jump in on that.
No, you well said. I
Okay.
appreciate that.
Yeah. Okay. So um, in so we're talking about a lot of like white supremacy stuff and how it can be ingrained. Where can people go to kind of be informed on what is and what isn't white supremacy? I asked that because um, and we might disagree on this, and that's totally fine. And I know I like disagree with a lot of people on this, but I sometimes feel when someone throws out the word white supremacy, I don't see justification for it. I'm like, they're just doing a normal thing. How is that white supremacy? That to me makes no sense. Where can people go to kind of educate themselves, or learn about what is, what isn't, what can be perceived, what are microaggressions? Because I know I grew up with a lot of white folk, Caucasians, however you want to say it. I know a lot of them are super genuine, awesome, amazing people. Yet someone who sees their action be like, oh, that's white supremacy, that's their white supremacy, they have white privilege, white power. I'm just like, no, they're just them, they're just doing them. Well, I'm not seeing color. But that could be a bias because I grew up with it around that. That could be my bias and my veil that's in front of me because I grew up 18 years in that town. So I sort of know. So where would you recommend people to go to kind of further the understanding of what white supremacy is, how to spot uh, clues or hints about it?
Mhm. Yeah, I know another shameless plug for Arctic. I would definitely encourage folks to connect with Arctic around getting access to our trainings and our resources, because I was like just looking away, looking at my book list, because there's just like so many books that I don't want to list off, but there's just like so many. I would definitely encourage folks if they're looking for training. Oh, and even also, I feel like even if Rebecca and Shay are amazing, so I feel like you could even potentially email Arctic and just say, "I'm looking for a book list. Can you send me that?" Because I know that in one of our slides on our PowerPoint is like a book list for additional resources. But like I said, in the most of our trainings, like our introductory training is called "How to Be Less Harmful," and we talk about critical race theory, the tenets of critical race theory, and most importantly, the tenets of white supremacy. And I think that getting that training is it's pretty eye opening for folks who have net, like even for myself who's has a degree in social work. Like it's deep and challenging and also really illuminating. It feels like liberatory education like that you're getting through these trainings. So I would encourage folks to find out if there's a way that they can invite Arctic to their organization and to their business, or if there's a way that even as an individual you can engage with the materials. And then if you're really feeling excited, I would say emailing and or Googling, like, okay, how can I learn more about critical race theory? Because we all know tons about white supremacy. People don't need to learn more about that. But I think Googling books on critical race theory and powerful authors is always going to be really helpful as well, because I'm coming from a lens of a clinician as a therapist. But other folks might be coming from the lens of a farm worker or as a doctor or as somebody who works in retail. Like there's so many different ways of connecting with this research and these ideas. And I think that there's a lot of, obviously we can figure out ways that they are meaningful to us in all of our lifestyles, but being able to deepen that understanding, I think finding books that call to you and authors that call to you that are talking about critical race theory would be definitely what I would recommend. And I know that Arctic has a pretty robust book list, so always feel free to reach out to Arctic and say, I'm looking to deepen my understanding, but I don't have the funds right now, maybe, to be able to pay for a training. Is there anything that you can do in regarding sliding scale? Is there resources you can send me to get an introductory level of understanding before I take a training? I'm sure that they would be more than willing to share that information.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for that. And then the last question I have here, because I think you answered, I had four, but I think you answered one of them in the first question I asked. So this one's a little bit lighter, a little bit more personal. But what is your favorite or most key moment that you've taken away from hosting a affinity space? Obviously, if it's too personal and you like to keep it to yourself, I respect that. But what's something that you've personally taken away that you're just thankful that you get the opportunity to host? 'Cause I think that's also really important, that if you're doing it, you're not really getting anything out of yourself either, then kind of like, what's the point? So just what's something that you've taken away that's really touched you while hosting these affinity spaces?
Amador, thank you so much for ending positively, because I know we've been talking about some intense stuff for
Yeah.
this session. Oh, that's honestly also, it's never too personal with Ari. That is an easy one. Really, the again, shout out to Crescencia and others like who I won't name today, but just like folks who I've talked to, and I can just see, like, especially when we get a chance to connect individually, just like maybe there's a month that no one's coming, except for one person. Like, I really just being able to see the palpable relief in people's bodies is so, like, it makes me tear up. Yeah, like I just am so grateful that I am in a position where I can affirm and validate people. And like I know, where you're just like, I thought I was crazy. I thought that I was being gaslit into thinking that this was not a big deal. But my heart, my spirit, my ancestors, my flesh knew that what was happening to me was messed up. And so just having somebody to be like, yeah, dog, like that is messed up is like it's such a relief. It really is like taking the rocks out of people's metaphorical backpack with them, doing that work with
Yeah.
them. So I feel like being able to see the relief and the gratitude from people, because again, I started out being like, what do I want to get things done? I want to provide people with tools. I want to do all these things. And just knowing that is the offering, is that relief, that affinity, that community support, that acknowledgement that what they're going through is not just in their head, it's a system working against them. And also, most importantly, that they are not alone and there's a pathway out. So I think that just being able to see the relief in people, whether that be tears or gratitude or just like vibes, like I just am so grateful that people keep, and also people keep coming back. Like it'd be one thing if people
Yeah.
weren't showing, but people keep, especially at Oriact, like people keep showing up because they get something out of the time. And so I just feel honored and humbled that people are learning and able to get something from these experiences. And it's just, ironically, it's like trickling down, like people get empowered and then they can empower others in their own private communities. So yeah, I think just like seeing people getting something out of this time and feeling less stressed, and it's like poison, like racism and these it's cortisol, it's all stress, and it's poison for our souls and our spirits. So being able to like help folks like suck out some of that poison and continue to heal, I'm just so honored to be able to be in that space with folks.
Well, that's amazing. Well, thank you so much. And just to recap over this episode or this recording that y'all are listening to, I hope you were able to take something away from it. I just wanted to share what an affinity space is and how affinity space is trauma-informed care. We're assessing people's traumas either in the work life or in their personal life, discussing their afflictions, discussing their concerns or worries about their identity, about who they are and how they look compared to other people or in the workplace. So I hope you were able to take something. And if you really want to know more about it, I really do encourage, and how Ari was saying, visit their website, look out how to facilitate one of these meetings, learn how to bring this up to maybe a local service provider in your area to talk about, hey, can you guys host an affinity space for people like me? So I hope you were able to take something away from this. I appreciate you, Ari, for again taking the time out of your day to do this, sit down with me. Do you have any final message for the people or any closing thoughts? I know I just hit you with a barrage of questions at the end, but I'd just like to give the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Amador. I really am so grateful for your patience and wanting to connect. And yeah, just a message to everyone. You are not alone. You are loved, you are cared for, and we're out here for you. And to stay well, however you need to.
All righty. Well, thank you so much, Ari. And thank you to everyone listening. This has been Voices in Action, a podcast by Eastern Oregon Center for Independent Living. As we're closing out today's episode, I'd really like to thank you all for tuning in and listening and spending your time with Ari and I. If you'd like to know any more about the services or programs we have available at EOCIL, I highly encourage you to check us out online at www.eocil.org or visit any one of our 5 office locations, whether that be the Dalles, LeGrand, Pendleton, or Ontario. So please check us out online or follow us on any of our social medias. With that, have a great rest of your day.